I was reborn at the moment when I had just met my husband. This time, I chose to ignore him. He applied to MIT, while I applied to the University of Florida. When he stayed at school during breaks, I went home to visit my parents. If he returned home, I stayed in Florida, keeping myself occupied with other things. After graduation, we unexpectedly met at a high school reunion. He helped Emily Snow pick up food, and the two of them seemed close and intimate. I sat next to the class president, chatting about my job and life. We had an unspoken understanding. Neither of us acknowledged the other, and neither of us paid attention to the other. In my past life, Liam and I were childhood sweethearts. With the blessings of both our families, we got married. When we grew old, as I sat by Liam's hospital bed, our only son shocked me with a request. He asked Liam and me to divorce. He wanted, after Liam's passing, for him to be buried with Emily Snow, the woman who had waited for him her whole life and never married. Looking at the University of Florida acceptance letter in my hands, I suddenly felt a sense of relief. In this life, I was finally free from the guilt and suffocation that Liam had brought upon me. I could finally live the life I wanted, one where I was free, unrestrained. No one knew that I had been reborn. When it came time to choose universities, I deliberately avoided picking the same school as Liam. Our parents were shocked when they found out about my choice and even came to ask me why. Everyone believed that Liam and I were meant to be together, as if it was something set in stone. Just hearing his name brought his tall and handsome figure to mind. If I hadn't been reborn, I would have thought the same way as them. He was not only good-looking, but also ambitious, a legend in our community. If it weren't for the deep ties between our families, I would have never even had the chance to stand by his side. I smiled and firmly told my parents and his, Mom, Dad, Uncle, Aunt, Liam and I aren't kids anymore. There's no need to keep tying us together. We've grown up, and we have our own choices to make. No one expected me to say that. Liam's father patted my shoulder and said, "Good for you, Claire," his eyes full of approval. It's rare to see someone recognize the truth and walk away from it. After all, Liam was the most sought-after man in the entire city, admired and pursued by so many talented women. I could have used the bond between our families as an excuse to cling to him forever. But instead, I chose to let go. After graduation, I became a high school teacher in a small town outside the city, while Liam became a highly accomplished engineer. We were no longer even comparable. But I had no regrets. In my previous life, after graduation, I used the strong ties between our two families to marry Liam. But after we got married, he remained cold to me. We never had children until I resorted to artificial insemination to conceive our only son, Thomas. Not long after Thomas was born, Liam entered a top-secret research institute in the north, completely cutting off contact with the outside world. I stayed home, raising our child and taking care of both sets of parents. Years later, when Liam finally returned, he brought divorce papers with him. In front of our parents, I cried, screamed, and accused him of being heartless. I had devoted myself to our family and home, yet this was how he repaid me? In the end, I forced him to give up on the divorce. After our parents passed away, Liam never came home again. Later, our son Thomas also got into MIT and moved to Boston with Liam. I was left alone in our hometown. Even when Thomas got married, Liam took care of everything in Boston and never even told me about it. I only found out through an old classmate who had been invited to the wedding. At the ceremony, there was no mother of the groom, only his godmother, Emily Snow. And then, Thomas started coming back to persuade me to divorce Liam. I refused. That's when he finally lost patience and lashed out at me. "Mom, do you even know how selfish you are? You've ruined Dad and Aunt Emily's entire lives. If not for you, they would have been together long ago. Dad never loved you. What exactly are you holding on to? Mom, I've never seen someone as selfish as you. You're absolutely cruel." Not only did my own son say such things to me, but even his wife loathed me. She believed I was a malicious woman who had ruined the true love between Liam and Emily Snow, turning their lives into a tragedy of regret. But what could I have done? Back then, Liam was the one who agreed to marry me. I never forced him. He was the one who promised my parents that he would take care of me for a lifetime. So why was it that, despite it all being their fault, the blame still fell on me? For Liam, I had given up on my dreams, devoted myself to our family, became a mother, a daughter-in-law. And yet, in the end, it was somehow all my fault. Everyone believed I had ruined his life, but what about mine? Was my life not a life worth considering? In the end, Thomas told me that Liam had been hospitalized. He pleaded with me to visit him, to give him closure. Looking at Liam lying on the hospital bed, his hair completely white, I suddenly felt a sense of release. Just as I picked up the pen, ready to grant him his wish, I suffered a sudden heart attack and passed away. In the end, I never got to fulfill his desire. But luckily, just luckily, I was reborn, back to the day before the college entrance exams. Everything could still be changed. I chose to apply to the University of Florida, far away from him. After graduation, he became a research engineer in the north and rarely returned to our hometown, while I stayed close to my parents, fulfilling my duty as their daughter, and finally pursuing the dream I had abandoned in my past life. Yes, in my previous life, I had wanted to be a teacher, but I gave it up for Liam. This time, I would hold on to it. I would live the life I wanted, with no more entanglements with him. Back home, I visited my parents. They were in the kitchen, cooking together lovingly. When my mother saw me, she eagerly called me over to taste my father's cooking. I smiled and praised his skills, telling my mother how lucky she was. As the three of us enjoyed the rare warmth of our little reunion, the doorbell rang. I walked over and opened the door, only to find Liam standing there. He studied me for a moment before saying, "Claire, long time no see." I took a step back and nodded slightly as a greeting. My parents, seeing that Liam had come, quickly welcomed him in. But I had no interest in him. I turned around and went back to my room. My parents exchanged a surprised glance at how distant we had become, then led Liam into the living room. He didn't stay long before leaving, and I didn't pay him any mind. I finished getting ready for the high school reunion I was attending that evening. That weekend, our class president, Henry, had sent out an invitation for a gathering. Since I hadn't seen my parents in a while, I had decided to return to Huayan City. Knowing that Liam never liked lively reunions, I didn't think much about it. Dressed in a simple white dress, I applied light makeup and booked a ride to the Lotus Grand Hotel. Henry was still the same, talkative and teasing. The moment he saw me, he showered me with compliments, saying I was becoming more beautiful and sophisticated. I simply smiled and ignored his teasing. When I entered the private room, I was caught off guard. Liam was there too. The room was filled with familiar faces, old classmates whom Henry had invited. The only two empty seats were beside Henry and Liam. Without hesitation, I chose the seat next to Henry, keeping my distance from Liam. I noticed Liam frowned slightly, but I paid no attention. There was no reason for me to overthink it. Just then, Henry's loud voice rang out again. "Look, our high school beauty queen Emily Snow is here." So that was it. Of course, Liam hadn't come because of me. Of course, he hadn't frowned because of me. It was all for her. During dinner, Liam kept gently placing food onto Emily's plate. Seeing this, Henry nudged me with his elbow. "Claire," he whispered, "weren't you two supposed to be a perfect match?" I glanced at him sideways. "Who told you that?" He chuckled. "Weren't you childhood sweethearts?" Leaning in close to his ear, I whispered, "Who said childhood sweethearts have to end up together? We were just childhood friends who played together. As we grew up, we each pursued our own paths. Stop trying to tie us together, it's outdated thinking. What era do we even live in?" Hearing this, Henry nodded in understanding, then asked about my job, and added me on a few social media platforms, saying it would be good to keep up with classmates. I gave him my contact information without hesitation. This was the longest Liam and I had sat together since our high school graduation 4 years ago. It was also the first time I felt nothing inside. When the reunion ended, everyone exchanged phone numbers and added each other on social media before heading home with their respective partners. As expected, Liam walked Emily Snow out, accompanying her. Henry, seeing me standing alone in the dimly lit night, chuckled and said, "Come on, old classmate, your class president will personally escort you home." I laughed and didn't make a fuss, getting into his car without hesitation. On the drive back, he kept reminiscing, saying that back in high school, I was practically Liam's shadow, always following him around. He found it hard to believe how distant we had become. I didn't take it to heart and simply replied, "Back then, we were young, and I saw him as an older brother. Now that we're grown, of course, I keep my distance to avoid any misunderstandings." Hearing that, Henry burst into laughter. "Oh, so you didn't like him after all?" I shook my head firmly. I didn't like him. Why would I? The car sped through the night, and soon we arrived back at my parents' residential complex. I thanked Henry and watched him drive away before turning toward the building. Just as I was about to enter, I noticed a faint red glow flickering under the large tree nearby, likely some poor guy who had been kicked out by his wife and was now smoking downstairs. I didn't pay it any mind and continued toward the entrance. Then a tall figure slowly stepped out from the shadows, blocking my path. I instinctively took a few steps back, keeping a safe distance from Liam. My guard went up as I watched him, unsure of why he was waiting here. After a long silence, his hoarse voice finally broke the night. "Claire, why are you avoiding me?" I let out a quiet sigh of relief. So that was what this was about. I supposed it must have been unsettling for someone who had always had a devoted follower to suddenly lose them. With a calm expression, I replied, "I'm not. You're imagining things." Liam didn't believe me. "Then why did you change your college preference? Why did you become a teacher?" I met his gaze and answered firmly, "Because I like it." Without waiting for his response, I turned and quickly walked into the building. Every second spent around him felt suffocating. It was clear we were never meant to be. I must have been out of my mind in my past life to waste my entire existence on a man like him. The next morning, I took an early bus back to Jincheng, where I taught. I had classes in the afternoon and couldn't afford any delays. 2 hours later, I finally arrived at the school gate. It was a top-ranked high school in the county, and I was the homeroom teacher for one of the senior year honors classes. My students both feared and respected me. After finishing my lessons for the day, I stayed in the office grading papers. That was when the academic director came in to inform me that each homeroom teacher would be leading their class on a field trip to the Science and Technology Museum the next day. I slumped over my desk and sighed. Kids these days had it easy. No need to cram in classrooms all day, no endless test drills. When I was their age, forget about science museums, we barely even got proper PE classes. I relayed the information to my new class vice president, Jason Wang, instructing him to have everyone assembled on the field by 8 a.m. sharp. The next morning, as expected, I overslept. Fortunately, my class president was on top of things. By the time I arrived, rushing to clock in at the last minute, he had already lined up the students, waiting for me. As I climbed onto the school bus, the tall, broad-shouldered Jason looked at me with mild disapproval. "Miss, can't you take this more seriously? I'm still a student, not your personal assistant." I ruffled his hair and grinned. "Jason, thank you. To me, you're not just a student, you're like a colleague and a dear friend." With that, we set off. The museum's tour guide led us through exhibits featuring various high-tech innovations. Just as I was listening to the explanation, a familiar figure suddenly came into view. Instinctively, I ducked behind Jason. Noticing my reaction, he glanced at Liam and lowered his voice. "What's wrong? Do you owe him money or something?" I rolled my eyes at him. "I just dislike him, that's all. No reason needed." Jason, sharp-witted despite his young age, thought for a moment before nodding. "Got it. Don't worry, I'll protect you. No one will bully you while I'm around." I looked at him with gratitude. "The best way you can protect me is by improving your grades." Jason scratched his head sheepishly. "Yeah, that's gonna be tough." I sighed at his lack of ambition. I felt a mix of frustration and disappointment. "Come on, at least try. If you get into a top university, I'll treat you to a 7-day trip to Florida." Jason's eyes lit up with excitement. "Really? You mean it?" I nodded firmly. We made a pact, whispering between ourselves, completely ignoring the ongoing tour guide's explanations. That night, after finishing my evening classes, I returned to my apartment. Just as I reached my floor, I saw Liam already waiting in the hallway. I clenched my jaw. This constant entanglement was exhausting. Instead of dragging it out, I might as well be direct. Looking at the fatigue in his eyes, I asked bluntly, "Do you need something?" Liam nodded slightly, then glanced at the stack of papers in my arms. "You just finished class?" I rolled my eyes. "Obviously." He suddenly chuckled. I never expected someone who hated studying to become a teacher. I had no patience for reminiscing about the past and cut straight to the point. If there's nothing else, I'm busy. I'll be going now. As I walked past him, he suddenly grabbed my wrist. I flinched as if electrocuted and instinctively tried to shake him off, but his grip was firm. The motion-activated lights in the hallway flickered off, casting us in darkness. Liam pulled me toward him, but I immediately stepped back, trying to escape the suffocating presence I despised. At that moment, the lights flickered back on, illuminating my expression of disgust. Seeing my reaction, Liam let out a bitter smile. "Claire, do you really hate me that much?" I looked down at his hand gripping mine. "If you let go, I'll talk to you properly." He hesitated for a moment before slowly loosening his grip. I wiped my wrist against my clothes, as if brushing off any trace of his touch. "I don't hate you. I don't like you either. We're simply not the same kind of people. You walk your path, and I'll walk mine. That's all there is to it." Liam's expression darkened. "Claire, have you forgotten? Our parents' greatest hope was for us to be together." I shook my head. No, their greatest hope was for both of us to be happy. He hadn't expected that answer. He couldn't understand how the girl who had once followed him around, who had shared his joys and sorrows, could now be so distant, so indifferent. "Claire, what did I do wrong?" I met his gaze head-on. "Nothing. Liam, you did nothing wrong, but don't mistake childhood companionship for something it's not. Otherwise, you'll regret it. And worse, you'll drag someone else's entire life down with you." With that, I brushed past him. "To me, Liam, you're just a friend. We've grown up now. It's time we understand what we truly want." I took out my key, unlocked my door, and quickly shut it behind me. I had made things clear. That should be the end of it, right? 9 days remained until the college entrance exams. In class, I guided my students over and over again, sharing my experience, reminding them to maintain a calm mindset. "The exam isn't the only path in life," I told them. "There are many ways to shape your future." They were the first batch of students I had ever taught. Looking at their youthful, eager faces, I felt a deep sense of responsibility. I suddenly thought of my past self, the girl who, despite not being an outstanding student, had buried herself in endless studying, pushing herself to the brink of collapse, just to get into the same university as Liam. I had even ruined my eyesight from all those sleepless nights spent cramming. But now I had let go of that obsession. I felt lighter than ever before. On the day of the college entrance exam, I got up early, dressed in a cheongsam for good luck, and gave my students one last round of encouragement. Jason looked at me, surprised that I was awake so early. "Miss, you finally look like a responsible teacher today." I laughed and patted his shoulder. "Jason, don't forget our deal." His face lit up with excitement. "Don't worry, you're definitely spending your summer break with me." I paused for a moment, confused by his words, but before I could ask, the principal's voice echoed through the speakers. I didn't dwell on it and focused on seeing my students off. Once the principal's speech ended, the students boarded their buses and left for their exam venues. The intense 3 days of exams passed in a blur. The moment it was over, I finally allowed myself to relax, lying in bed and scrolling through my phone. That was when I saw a post from Henry in my social feed. Liam and Emily Snow had both taken positions at the Hwayong City Research Institute. They had returned to their hometown to build their careers together, and the mayor himself had personally welcomed and praised them. In the attached photo, the two of them stood side by side, looking like a perfect golden couple. This time, I had not been in their way. Their relationship had progressed smoothly, without any obstacles. That afternoon, Jason and a few other students had arranged a thank you banquet for their senior year teachers at a hotel in the city. As their homeroom teacher, I had to attend. Since I usually dressed modestly, I decided to put in some effort for this special occasion. After all, it was the last time my first class of students would be gathered together. I applied bold makeup, put on a flowing white dress, and slipped into high heels before heading to the event. The moment I stepped in, my students were visibly stunned. Jason, in particular, turned red, suddenly struggling to find the right words when speaking to me. Seeing him so flustered, I patted his shoulder. "Jason, look at you. You act like you've never seen a well-dressed woman before." Once you're in college, you'll be surrounded by beauties everywhere. You won't see plain-looking classmates like in high school anymore. Jason scratched his head awkwardly, clearly embarrassed. At the dinner table, the teachers treated the students as friends, chatting about life, dreams, and the future, avoiding any mention of exam results to keep the mood light. By the end of the meal, I had indulged in a few drinks, leaving me slightly dizzy. Still, I held myself together, making sure all the teachers and students got home safely. Jason noticed my flushed face and insisted on walking me back to the faculty apartments. I waved him off. "Go home, Jason. Your parents will worry." No matter how much I tried to send him away, he refused to leave, sticking close behind me. Seeing me wobble slightly in my heels, he suddenly scooped me up and placed me on the stone ledge of a flower bed by the roadside. Then, without a word, he took off my heels and slipped his sneakers onto my feet. I frowned and asked seriously, "Jason, do you have athlete's foot?" The corner of his mouth twitched. "Miss, do you have to ruin the mood? Shouldn't you be touched by my kindness?" I looked at him with mock confusion, then pointed at his feet. "Touched by what? Isn't it natural for you to be of service to your teacher?" Before he could respond, I suddenly stood up in his oversized sneakers. "Jason, let's race. First one to the traffic light wins." Without waiting for his answer, I bolted like a rabbit. Jason glanced at the high heels in his hands, then at his bare feet, before yelling after me, "Miss, I've never met a teacher as shameless as you." Laughing and teasing each other, we ran all the way back to the faculty apartments. As I handed his sneakers back to him, I smiled. "Thank you, Jason. If it weren't for you, I didn't even know how to respond." Jason took his shoes back and sat on the steps to put them on. "At least you have some conscience," he muttered. "I didn't follow you around all night for nothing." I burst into laughter and called him a ride home. Just as he was about to leave, he stuck his head out of the car window and shouted, "Miss, don't forget our deal." The night breeze lifted the hem of my dress and tousled my long hair. I tucked a few loose strands behind my ear and shouted back, "Got it." After seeing Jason off, I turned and walked back to my apartment. As I stepped into the hallway, I saw that familiar figure again. I couldn't understand. What exactly did Liam want? This time, I didn't avoid him. I walked straight toward him, stopping only when I was at a safe distance. Liam put out his cigarette and looked at me in silence. I didn't say anything either, because honestly, I had nothing to say. After a while, he finally broke the silence. "Was that your student?" I nodded. "Yeah, he's the class president of my senior class," Liam chuckled. "So, you've changed your taste." What did he mean by that? I didn't understand and looked at him in confusion. Suddenly, he stepped closer. I instinctively backed away, forgetting about the step behind me. Just as I lost my balance, he grabbed me and pulled me into his arms, preventing me from falling. I struggled to break free, but he held me tightly, refusing to let go. The scent of cigarettes and alcohol mixed together, filling the space between us. Above me, his voice carried a hint of sorrow. "Claire, so you've really moved on." I was stunned. What did he mean by that? Why did he act like I had done something to hurt him? Taking a deep breath, I said firmly, "Liam, enough. We were just childhood friends. Don't make it sound like there was ever anything between us." As soon as I finished speaking, I felt his body tense up. "Claire, do you really not like me anymore?" he asked. I couldn't help but laugh, really laugh. "Liam, I never liked you in that way. I always saw you as an older brother. But when I realized that being too close to you would lead to misunderstandings, I chose to distance myself. We're just friends." Liam slowly let go of me, his gaze serious. I met his eyes calmly, without a trace of hesitation in my heart. After a moment, he shook his head and muttered, "I'm sorry, I must be drunk," humiliating myself over and over again. With that, he turned and walked away. I had no idea what kind of nonsense he was going through, but I didn't care. The college entrance exam was finally over, and I planned to head back to Huayan City for some rest. I wanted to stay with my parents, sleep as much as I wanted, wake up to warm, home-cooked meals, and not worry about a thing. Just thinking about it made me happy. With that in mind, I packed a small bag, called a car, and took an overnight trip back home. When I opened the front door, my parents were already asleep. I tiptoed into my room, changed into comfortable pajamas, quickly washed up, and collapsed onto my bed, falling into a deep sleep. The next morning, sunlight streamed through my window. I opened my eyes slightly and saw my dad sitting by my bed, wearing an apron. Groaning, I pulled the blanket over my head. "Dad, close the curtains. I barely slept last night. I'm so tired." He quickly got up and adjusted the curtains for me. In a gentle voice, he said, "Claire, I made your favorite ham and egg pancakes, and there's red date and white fungus soup too. Eat a little before going back to sleep." I suddenly threw off my blanket and called out playfully, "Little Liu, this princess wants to have her meal in bed." My dad responded enthusiastically, "Your wish is my command, Your Highness." After eating my fill, I flopped back onto my bed and drifted off to sleep again. When my mom came in, ready to scold me, my dad quickly put a finger to his lips, signaling her to keep her voice down. He gently led her out of the room. From outside, I could still hear my mom grumbling, "Look at how spoiled you've made your little princess. Since when is it normal to eat in bed?" My dad chuckled as he massaged her shoulders. "My queen, little Liu is simply serving breakfast. Our little princess has been exhausted lately. Let's not disturb her." Then he quietly shut my door. Lying in bed, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of admiration for their love. Having parents like this was truly a blessing. In my past life, I had foolishly turned myself into a resentful woman. What a waste. This time, I swore to find a husband who would treat me like a princess. By noon, I didn't dare to keep up my spoiled act and make my dad serve me again. I finally got up, washed my face, brushed my teeth, and lazily tied my hair into a loose bun. Sitting with my parents, I chatted about school while they filled me in on the latest gossip from our neighborhood. What surprised me most was that Liam's father had been hospitalized. After lunch, my parents planned to visit him at the city hospital and asked if I wanted to come along. I hesitated for a long time before deciding to go. After all, I had spent much of my childhood sneaking into the Wen's house to eat and hang out. If I hadn't known about his illness, that would have been one thing. But now that I did, it would feel wrong not to pay a visit. Carrying a fruit basket, I followed my parents to Liam's father's hospital room. Mrs. Wen greeted us warmly, and I felt relieved to see that Liam wasn't there. That made things much easier. Mr. and Mrs. Wen asked about my job, and I gave them a simple summary. I also asked about Mr. Wen's health. Learning that it wasn't anything serious, I finally felt at ease. In my past life, Mr. Wen had been in relatively good health, but he had worried endlessly over Liam and me. When he found out Liam wanted to divorce me, he had even fallen ill several times from the stress. This time, since Liam and I had never been together, that problem wouldn't exist. Meanwhile, my mom sat with Mrs. Wen, chatting about everyday matters, while my dad and Mr. Wen discussed old colleagues and shared memories. Feeling bored, I quietly slipped out of the hospital room and leaned against the hallway railing, lost in thought. The sound of high heels and leather shoes clicking against the floor pulled me from my daze. Turning my head, I saw Emily Snow walking arm in arm with Liam, carrying a bag of gifts. I quickly turned away, pretending I hadn't seen them. After what happened last night, I had even less reason to interact with him. They seemed equally surprised to see me. Emily looked like she wanted to say hello, but Liam pulled her into the hospital room without a word. Moments later, I could hear my parents chatting with them, along with Mr. and Mrs. Wen's warm thanks for Emily's visit. I thought for a moment, then sent my dad a text. "I'll be waiting in the car downstairs." As soon as the message was sent, I turned to leave. But before I could reach the stairs, I suddenly ran into Jason. He was wearing a hospital gown, being pushed in a wheelchair by his parents. I froze. Wasn't he perfectly fine last night? In an instant, all the dramatic stories from TV and novels about students enduring illness just to take their college entrance exams flashed through my mind. A lump formed in my throat, and my eyes welled up with tears. Seeing me about to cry, Jason panicked. He immediately jumped out of his wheelchair. Wait. Don't cry." He stammered, trying to comfort me, but clearly had no idea why I was even crying in the first place. Without warning, I threw myself into his arms, wailing, "I'm so sorry, Jason. I shouldn't have let you worry about everything. This is all my fault. I made you so exhausted that you got sick." Jason immediately understood that I had misunderstood the situation. He stood there awkwardly, glancing at his parents, unsure of how to explain. His mom quickly stepped forward with a laugh. Miss Liu, you've got it all wrong. He just had a minor surgery. He's perfectly fine. He's even looking forward to that Florida trip with you. I pulled away from Jason's arms and stared at his flushed face in confusion. Bookmark. Sniffling, I asked, Really? You're not? Jason quickly held up 3 fingers. I swear, it was just a small procedure. Don't overthink it. Your imagination is way too wild. I nodded in response. At that moment, I noticed Liam standing nearby, watching as my parents exited the hospital. He must have seen that embarrassing moment just now. My parents approached Jason's parents, greeting them warmly before turning to me with concern. What's going on? They asked. Jason's parents hesitated for a long moment before finally sighing and explaining. Jason just had a minor surgery. Miss Liu mistakenly thought he was seriously ill. Hearing this, my parents were taken aback, clearly embarrassed by my overreaction. They apologized to Jason's parents repeatedly. Once we got home, I felt a bit guilty myself and sheepishly explained to my parents how my imagination had run wild. They sighed and said that being a homeroom teacher for a senior class had drained me too much and suggested I take a short vacation. Thinking about the promise I made to Jason, I decided to wait until his results came out before planning anything. Finally, at the end of June, the college entrance exam results were released. My class had performed exceptionally well. 10 students got into top-tier universities, 8 into highly ranked ones, and the rest were accepted into good colleges. Only a couple of students, whose results weren't ideal, planned to retake the exam. I personally called each of my students to offer congratulations and encouragement. The biggest surprise was Jason. He had gotten into the University of Florida. Excited, I packed up a few gifts and headed to congratulate him. When I arrived at his hospital room, I found it empty. Instead, I heard his cheerful voice coming from the room next door, Liam's father's hospital room. Curious, I stepped inside. Sure enough, Jason was sitting in there, enthusiastically sharing all the embarrassing stories from when I taught his class from their freshman to senior year. Mr. and Mrs. Wen were laughing heartily at his tales, while Jason, completely oblivious to my presence, was talking animatedly, gesturing wildly with his hands. Only when Mr. Wen kept giving him meaningful glances did Jason finally pause and turn around. When he saw me standing behind him, fists clenched, he immediately raised his hands over his head and pleaded, "Miss, not the face." I rolled my eyes and grabbed his wheelchair, pushing him toward the door. As we reached the doorway, we ran into Liam and Emily Snow. Reacting instinctively, I yanked Jason's wheelchair to the side, quickly maintaining a safe distance from them. Jason, caught off guard, nearly toppled out of his chair, giving me an indignant look. Emily smiled politely. "Claire, long time no see, and this is?" Before I could respond, Jason stood up and casually draped his arm around me. "I'm her student. She's my homeroom teacher, Miss Liu," he said with exaggerated emphasis. Emily gave me a knowing smile. "Oh, I didn't expect your student to be your boyfriend." I remained silent, unwilling to engage, but Jason clearly wasn't happy. "Miss, have some respect. I'm already an adult." With a dramatic huff, he bumped Emily aside and turned to Liam. "Mr. Wen, you should keep your woman in check. Don't let her go around spreading rumors." Liam frowned slightly and shot a glance at Emily. "Emily, let's go inside." Without giving Jason another look, he entered the room. I quickly grabbed Jason, who was still bristling with irritation. "Jason, why are you picking fights with strangers? Just drop it and go back to your room. You got into the University of Florida." Jason's anger instantly vanished, replaced by pure excitement. He lifted me off the ground in one swift motion. "Miss, you're not messing with me, right?" I laughed and nodded. "You really got into a top university. Now put me down. Show some respect. I'm still your teacher." Grinning, he wheeled himself back into his room and eagerly called his parents to share the good news. Then, with a sly smirk, he turned to me and said, "Miss, time to keep your promise, right?" I nodded. "No problem. Once you recover, we'll go." After chatting with Jason for a bit, I got up to leave, but he insisted on personally seeing me off, so I had no choice but to push his wheelchair toward the elevator. Unexpectedly, we ran into Liam and Emily again. This time, Emily ignored Jason and turned directly to me. "Claire, I didn't expect your students to achieve such outstanding results. Congratulations." I had no interest in playing along with empty words, I simply nodded, pushed Jason into the elevator, and ignored Emily's attempt to engage me. Realizing I wasn't responding, she didn't bother forcing the conversation and instead clung to Liam's arm. Liam, when are we going to pick out our new home? I kept my expression blank, eyes fixed on the changing floor numbers. Liam stared at me for a moment before replying, "Let's wait until my dad is discharged from the hospital." Without much thought, I casually said, "Congratulations, Liam." Emily clearly hadn't expected me to be so straightforward in offering my well wishes. She tightened her grip on Liam's arm and responded sweetly, "Thank you, Claire. We'll be very happy. I hope you'll be happy too." She then glanced at Jason. At that moment, the elevator doors opened. I smiled. We'll be leaving now." With that, I pushed Jason's wheelchair toward the parking lot. Back home, I lay on my bed feeling lighter than ever. Liam and his first love were finally together, and I was free of their entanglement for good. Thinking about it, I smiled and drifted off to sleep. When Jason was finally discharged, I was the one who picked him up and brought him home to recuperate. Remembering my promise, I started preparing for our 7-day trip to Florida. Since his arrival, Jason had used his sweet-talking ways to charm my parents completely. They told him every little story from my childhood, including details about my childhood friendship with Liam. What's more, Jason cooked for us every day, winning my parents over entirely. That day, as I squatted on the floor folding clothes, I noticed Jason glancing at me repeatedly. Then he turned to my parents and casually said, "Oh, so Liam was Miss Liu's childhood friend, but why does she avoid him so much?" My parents exchanged a puzzled look. Who knows? Ever since the college entrance exams, Claire has kept her distance from him. Jason thought for a moment before grinning. "Uncle, Auntie, isn't it obvious? Miss Liu doesn't like Liam. She avoids him so he won't cling to her. I mean, just look at how beautiful and outstanding she is." My parents burst into laughter, completely agreeing with his words. 3 days later, Jason and I went to Florida. We walked along the beach, watched seagulls, admired the sunrise and sunset by the shore, and enjoyed the local cuisine. On the last day, we visited the University of Florida. Standing in front of the university gates, Jason suddenly knelt down. From nowhere, he pulled out a bouquet of flowers and looked up at me with bright eyes. "Miss, I like you. I've liked you since the first time I saw you. Will you be my girlfriend?" I froze, staring at him in disbelief. Then I shook my head firmly. "Jason, I can't be with you. I'm 4 years older than you, and you were my student." Jason just laughed. "Give me a real reason to reject me. You know, I don't care about things like that." His serious gaze met mine, and I glanced around at the crowd that had started to gather. After a brief pause, I sighed. "Fine, I'll wait for you for 4 years. If, after 4 years, you still feel the same way, I'll say yes." Hearing that, Jason beamed, immediately standing up. "You have to keep your word." I nodded. That day marked our farewell. I returned to Jincheng and continued teaching, taking in a new batch of freshmen, and leading them through military training. During the new year, I received a wedding invitation from Liam and Emily. I attended the wedding with my parents, but from beginning to end, I never once looked at Liam. In this life, our paths would never cross again. 4 years passed in the blink of an eye. I dedicated myself to my students, teaching with passion. At first, Jason contacted me frequently, but as his studies became more demanding, our conversations grew less frequent. I didn't mind. After everything I'd experienced in my past life, I had come to see relationships differently. No one can love another person unchangingly for years on end. If such devotion exists, it belongs in stories, not reality. That day, as I sat in my office grading papers, I suddenly noticed a sky full of heart-shaped balloons rising outside my window. Then, a massive banner unfurled in the air. "Claire Liu, marry me." The teachers around me turned to look, while I sat there in shock. Who would suddenly propose to me like this? I stepped out onto the balcony and looked down. The entire schoolyard was covered in roses. At the center, an enormous, heart-shaped arrangement spelled out my name. And there, standing in the middle of it all, dressed in a sharp suit, holding a bouquet, was Jason. Seeing me, he called out loudly, "Claire Liu, I love you. Will you marry me? I've loved you for 7 years, and I'll continue loving you forever." I ran down the stairs, my heart swelling with emotions. As I reached him, I looked into his eyes and smiled softly. Jason, you're here.